Hi, this is Cindy Presgraves with Real Estate Divorce Single Mom, and today we have Vic Wilson.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, and we're going to be talking about the history of New Holland. There's this book that, we actually discovered. Well, they told me about it yesterday, and it's actually pretty cool. It's like he calls it the Bible of New Holland, which is actually really interesting because it's the history of New Holland, Georgia, and Pacolet Manufacturing Company by J.A. Webb. And in this book, what I did see was like they had like everybody that actually grew up in New Holland for a certain period of time, correct?
Right.
And it's like they have like the dedication of people that died in the war, the people that went to the war. Um, like I'm just popping into the picture here into a book, and this is basically like teachers, and it's really, really interesting, especially in this area in particularly.
That's right. The picture you just turned to, you still have.
No, I don't.
That was our principal.
Oh, that was
at
principal.
New Holland Elementary. Her name was Adabelle. Miss Adabelle Gould. Well, there's many, many pictures of not only the village, but the school, the gym, all the streets, but also the people that came and settled and established New Holland. That's in here. And this book is by John Arthur Webb. A lot of people call him Arthur, but he is more known by Dutch Webb. And this is his book. It came out in 1984. I believe he died right before it came out, so he wasn't able himself to finish it. But the stories about this man walking the streets of New Holland, taking pictures, collecting pictures in a paper bag, not a plastic bag, but a paper bag. And people would really love to see him coming because they knew that not only was he going to stop and hopefully gain a story about the village, but he was going to share a few, but also take pictures and put them in this book that came out in 1984, I believe. No longer available through the publishing company. I think they're probably out of business now, but these are collectibles, very valuable books. And if you've never seen one and you're really interested in New Holland, this gives you more of a history than most any book I've ever seen about any place. And I'm just glad I have a copy. And I refer to it quite often, every week. But wonderful pictures, wonderful stories of families, of teachers, of mill officials, and anyone else who had a hand in making this village come together back in, before, in the 19th century, actually. But
it's really, really interesting because I've seen books of Gainesville and New Holland, but I never took an interest in it just because I didn't know. And sometimes when you don't know about something, you really don't just like, you know what, that's it. But now that I know, like the parlor, which is the building, the New Holland building, which is where we're at today, it's really interesting how everything is starting to come up alive. Like in this book, when I was looking at it yesterday, it was like, so this road was actually by teachers. And then it was like, it's so interesting. Like I get really, really excited because you can see like old pictures back then, like how people dressed, and it's amazing. So if you don't know anything about this, you gotta see this book, see the book and come to the parlor. Okay. Something that I actually went ahead and also, I know this is not part of the book. Oh wait, this is part of the book, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. This is part of the book too. Okay. So the parlor, which I'm actually looking at, this building, look at this. This is like architectural forms of the New Holland parlor. It is so cool. So, so cool. And it tells you like the pool and all that. And now Vic is going to show a little bit of, what are you going to show?
This is the other book of New Holland. Don't know if you can read this or not, but it's about the Pacolet Manufacturing Company from 1882 to 1927. So the pictures and the stories in this book are in that range. And some of the pictures are fantastic. One, we'll be talking about a story about this building here. It's called the Auditorium. It's set kind of to our right here behind the Methodist Church. And the the gymnasium here where Warner has his business, the auditorium. It's no longer here. It was torn down in 1960. There's a story about that too. They tore it down. They didn't. They disassembled it. They didn't tear it down. It was sold to Hubert Vickers at that time, and he was going to use the wood, use the brick, whatever, to, I guess, build a storage bin or storage place for his, materials and all. But beautiful stories. This place, they say, was haunted. I can verify that I truly believe that it might have been.
So do you have any stories of like the parlor, like the building, like anything that you would see?
Well, one of the stories that I'll go back to, I used to keep a copy of the newspaper article in my billfold without getting it laminated. It's since gone, but there's a gentleman here named Jim King, and Jim was related to the Daniels and the Schulers and the King family, but he had an accident in the pool downstairs, and they were able to they noticed that he was at the bottom of the pool, and a couple of stories about that, but they were able to get him out and get him to the, I guess, Downey Hospital at that time. New Holland might have been on its way, but anyway, he died of pneumonia 3 days after being pulled from the pool that sits below us here. So there's great stories. I'm sure there's more to that. If there's anyone out there that knows more about that or even knew Jim King or his family, it'd be great to kind of give an update on that situation. But we've had some tragedy. We've had some stories that, are kind of sad. But we also had some great stories. The picture I showed you about the auditorium behind us here, a lot of people are interested in spooks, ghosts, haunts, whatever. And we are inundated with those stories here at New Holland. There's several. There's a few that we still kind of test and quiz each other every day. Today, a few of us guys who grew up are meeting at the Double D cafeteria at 11:15 to talk. It's our monthly meeting, and they'll be telling the same stories over and over again, stretching a little bit. But the auditorium that sat behind us always heard until one night we saw it. It could have been set up by some of the older Millie kids in the area. We saw a shadow on the second floor up there. So we started running. That was it. Didn't sleep for 2 days. I think it might have been set up by older kids, but I'd rather believe that there was someone else up there. Maybe, one of our homeless figures at that time, but it did provide some excitement for the village. There is a story about a gentleman that had an accident in the auditorium and had passed away, but don't know the facts really that surround that. But every now and then when we played hide and seek or fox and hounds, when we saw that shadow, it ended our game early that night and we went home. But New Holland is full of those stories. And some of these, especially the pictures in the book that Cindy has here, the Bible, we call that the Bible. Dutch Webb did an amazing job. And what amazes me also is that his two daughters were able to complete the book for him with all the bags of pictures and stories and put this together after he had passed away. So it's a remarkable book. And if you can get a copy of this is something I refer to, go to, visit 2 or 3 times a week. It's just so interesting. There's something new in there every time I go in there that I've read maybe 20 times, 30 times, but something different each time I go in there. So if you can get a copy of that and find some way to share it with your family if you have ties to New Holland, or if you want to learn more about New Holland, you'll find pictures in there about classmates from the 20s. Actually, there's pictures of classmates at the bottom of the steps back here before they built school number 3, and also the school that was in the old apartment building, which was actually New Holland School number 2, of students who went there then at the turn of the 20th century. Beautiful pictures. But also the teachers. We have an assortment of teachers that were hired by the mill to do what they do best, and that was to teach, to love the kids, to keep in touch with the parents, and to keep the school thriving and going, and hopefully, I'm a product of New Holland Elementary School, and I enjoyed it. Not all the teachers were my favorites by any means, and I was a kind of a subdued, quiet kid, but I had a great experience down there, and I knew basically that we were loved and we were cared for, and they spent their lives dedicating to their education to teach us. And I believe that that's one of the testaments of New Holland, that the mill invested in the people. And I'm glad to be a Millie kid.
So it's really interesting because I'm actually still looking at the book, but I mean, I see a few last names like Cook, Meeks. I know the Presleys too. So there's a few familiar names that are still around the area. So it's like I said, it's really interesting because I'm going to show you one of the pictures here. This is like one of the ones that popped up. This is like I don't know if you guys can see it there well, but this is like what the book looks like. It's the history. And these are actual people that grew up in town, that grew up in Gainesville, grew up in New Holland. So it's really interesting on what New Holland was then and how it developed today. And it's still growing. Definitely. It's a really interesting book.
We see a change in New Holland. We've mentioned it for the last 2 weeks now. And just noticed another red mailbox today, a new one, which means that Mr. Norton has purchased another home, is remodeling it, and going to make it into a duplex. I know there's some people out there that have trouble with that, and some of those are really, have a heart for New Holland. But the thing is, that's the way this village started. Pacolet came in here, built the homes, built the gymnasium, built the schools, churches and all, but they built these homes for families to share. As long as they worked in the mill, they could rent the homes. And then they were finally sold in, I think, the middle of the late 50s. But they were rentals. And they're nicely redone. I've been in the church here a couple of times, that he has kept the outside character of the church intact, but inside are the beautiful apartments with stained glass windows. Just has completely refurbished it and not restored it, but certainly remodeled it. And it is a home to several families now. That church wasn't originally there in the village. It was built after the tornado of 1903. Some speculation says that there was a home there. And when the home was destroyed in the tornado of 1903, that Pacolet decided to build a church, and that he did. And that stayed the church for both the Methodist and the Baptist until 1951, when they opened New Holland Baptist Church a couple of blocks over. So history, stories, intrigue, interest, it's encapsulated with love, with desire, and with a kind of a work ethic that probably, to me, I haven't seen anything like it. Spending many years in the mill, my dad was able to tell me a few stories, but he was kind of a quiet guy. But there's many stories about the mill, and some tragic, but the people would work there, some double shift. Sometimes we think the people just lived there. They didn't, but they did love to work for Pacolet, and it eventually became Milliken, I think, in the early 60s. But again, one of these books that just glad to have around, glad to refer to. And this one also. It's a thin book, but it tells a lot about the early history. Now, what I'd like to say here is that there's a lady in here that has just got my attention, and I've been doing some research. And I had a school friend that had just dropped off a bunch of pictures and articles and newspaper articles about some of our early people in the village, and just gave it to me. So whatever you do with this, do with it, share it, whatever. And one of those ladies, her name was Catherine Dozier, and she was called a school consultant for the mill. She was more or less hired to go out and hire the teachers. She had a job herself, but she was considered one of the pioneers of education in New Holland Village. She wrote the introduction to this book here, and the way it is versed, the way it reads, is so easy to read. It's simple, but it's to the point, and it's just filled with beautiful language. Her name is Catherine Dozier, and she and my principal, my group had three principals in New Holland. The first one was Rhett Turnipseed, who was a great athlete, but also became a school superintendent, before the county and all. But he was also a principal. And then Miss Ada Bell Gould, until I think we were in the 7th grade, and that's when they hired Curtis Chapel. So Miss Ada Bell was one of the sweetest, kindest, lovingest women I've ever met. But she and Miss Dozier had a great relationship. And Miss Gould herself had graduated from Gainesville in 1910, and I believe she started teaching at New Holland in 1913, if I read it right. There's even a picture of the trolley that came out to New Holland here at the bottom of the hill and would bring, before they built the teachers' cottages around the gym here, the trolley from New Holland would bring the teachers out to come to school. And I have a picture. Well, it's actually in Dutch Webb's book here of 3 of those teachers. One of them was Miss Gould, I think, Miss Smallwood, another teacher, I forget who it was. But it just gives you and how Cindy just referred to how they dressed. Our teachers dress that way today. And I don't know how long they keep their jobs, but I know that they did what was popular at that time. But Miss Gould, she is buried in Alta Vista Cemetery, right near my grandfather and grandmother. But she was just a sweet lady who loved kids, and that's what I remember most about the school and about her. And of course, Mr. Chapel was my last principal, and he was a gentleman himself, our basketball coach, and he taught 8th grade also with Miss Walpole. But he ran the school. He ran a pretty tight ship, but he loved kids. And he just died recently over in Dawson County. I think he was 130. I'm not sure how old he was, but he was old. He was in his late 90s. Just a gentleman.
So when you're talking, so I'm going back to the church now, because I did see there's a bell behind it. Do you know anything about that bell?
Do I know anything about that bell?
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
So what's the history? Because I see that they kept it behind it.
Well, he was originally, Mr. Norton. We were here when they did lift it out. Had a crane that lifted out of the steeple. It was in the steeple up there, in the church. The steeple's in kind of bad shape, but there's stories about that steeple, about us going in and ringing that bell when it didn't need to be rung. But also, we had a caretaker here of the church, of this village, and her name was, I won't mention her name. Emo Strickland was her name. Miss Emo. Loved her. She didn't like us too much. She did later on. We got together and had laughs and all later on before she passed away. But she was a caretaker of that church. Anyway, we'd go in and we'd sneak into the church because they kept the doors open. They were never locked. We could go in, walk around, whatever. We never did anything wrong. She was always afraid we were going to break some of the stained glass windows, which are still there, still in pretty intact. But the bell there rang at certain times. And it usually was something that's going on at the church or in the village. And it would sound a huge sound. Besides, the mill had its own horn, which, noted the end of a shift, the beginning of the next shift. They had, they worked 24 hours a day. The bell had its own character. And so Mr. Norton, I think, was kind of faced with, what is he going to do with this bell once he takes control of the church? Well, he had it removed, brought down. Originally, he was going to put the bell in a case outside on a stoop in front of the church. I really don't know why he changed his mind about that, but now it sits in the back. It's back there. It still rings. He's got it blocked off where you can't ring it, but it still has a beautiful, beautiful sound to it. And if you come back, you can see you can see the bell from here.
Yeah, you can. That's why I was like looking at it. I keep on looking at the bell. So it's behind the church, which it actually says New Holland Church when you go through Spring Street.
Yep. Spring
Street. And it's going to be like next to the building. And it says New Holland Church. And then behind it is going to be the bell, which is really cool. And it's just like, it's a beautiful bell. So, it has a lot of history, it has a lot of stories and all that, which is really awesome.
Well, what I'll do is on Facebook, I'll put some more pictures on there that you haven't seen. But, I got some recent pictures from the loft up there, from the steeple of the bell before it was removed.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. But it has a tremendous history itself. They had quite a bit of time getting it here to store it in the church itself. But, it served its purpose for many, many years.
So was the church built before this building or was it?
This church was the church was built before this building. This building first shovel full, 1918,
Okay.
and they opened the doors in 1921. The church itself was like 1904 to 19 between 1904 and 1906, after the 1903 tornado.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Cyclone.
And it's still like intact.
Oh yeah,
it's really
beautiful. I mean, there's even it looks like it sits on the ground. I was up there when they were restoring it, and there's even a space underneath the ground that's at least 3 feet high, which suggests that possibly at one time there was a home there. And when it was destroyed by the 1903 tornado, they built the church there in its place.
Nice.
Now, I grew up across the street from the church. I got up every morning facing that church. I mean, God was in my face every morning. And sometimes I had to hide, not that I did anything really, really bad wrong, but I wished I had been more involved in that church. And I did go a few blocks away to the Baptist church when I did go. But I don't have any regrets in life. But one thing I would have done different was been more involved with the community in that church right there across the street from my house. Now, we played. That was our home until Miss Strickland came home from the mill every day at 4. We would play out in front of that church. We would ride around our bikes around on the sidewalk that went around the church and the auditorium and home. She didn't like that. She was so protective of that church and the value of it that when that horn went off at 4 o'clock, we knew we had about 4 minutes to get out of here because we'd see her walking up the street. Everybody walked home from the mill around here. But if you were around and you were doing something maybe she didn't like, she would not hesitate in telling you, taking care of the village.
That's pretty awesome.
Preserve it. But she was a sweet lady. She really was. We got to know her really well in her later years. It's just a shame that, there was a time, Cindy, that when that congregation there met, we would have to go because most of us went to the other church. So we couldn't get out in the streets and play. We couldn't play Fox and Hounds. We couldn't do this and that because they were singing and preaching so loud. They used to have the windows open. And they were so loud that they interfered with our playing. Well, later on, when I was a teenager, before whatever, when the population in the congregation really had dwindled, we would be outside playing, and they would come to the door, Miss Emo would, and ask us to be quiet and move. Now, we're talking about in my yard on the sidewalk, but they could hear us inside. Well, that's not the way it always worked. They were lively. I mean, just Otis Kinsey on the piano leading the music there and the choir. But the preaching was vibrant. I mean, John Wesley was, he was fire and brimstone for a while himself. And that's the way it was in the early days. But they always had something going on, whether it was a cookout or Bible study or whatever. They stayed together. They even had one preacher there that taught the kids in the church karate. I'll never forget him, Preacher Scott. And so they always had something going on. And, that's what I remember most about that church. And every Sunday, the cars would be lined up and down the street. And there was no parking place here. This was a crooked ground here. And there was an auditorium, so they couldn't park there. But they would be lined up and down Spring Street, Highland, and down Myrtle Street. They were filled. I mean, it was just packed for a long time until, like the late 90s, they started to dwindle quite a bit. But made up of families that lived here, worked here, and worshiped here most of their lives.
So I'm curious. Okay, so now because you grew up in front of the church and all that. Okay, so the houses were rented by Pacalet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now my question is, did they ever sell those properties to the the tenants, or how did that work?
They did to those that could afford it. My mom and dad were able to purchase that home, a couple thousand, I believe, and that was because my mom and dad worked at that time, and that was in the mid 50s. A lot of folks were able to buy the homes, and some weren't, but they would be bought by people who could afford to buy 2 or 3 and then rent it back to to the people who lived there. Some people had to move. I'll never forget. I lost a couple of friends in the neighborhood because someone had bought their home and they had to move to a different part, but also because that their mom and dad didn't work in the mill anymore. You didn't, when they sold it, you didn't have to work in the mill, but most of them still did. But we were able to purchase that home, but it was a duplex. We lived on the upper side, and I had an older brother, an older sister, until the mid '50s, and then the dad and mom bought the home. I know that several homes around us here were bought by one man, and he fixed them up as much as he could, but he would rent them back to the people who lived there originally.
No, it's interesting because that seems like so back in the 1900s, it was Pacolet had the houses. They rented it to the employees of the mill. Then the employees were able to purchase them. But now it seems like all these houses are starting to have red mailboxes. So, and they're being rented back. So I see there's like a pattern there.
Well, some of the homes too are being bought by people who had an interest there or have other interests, not necessarily by Mr. Norton, but they're redoing them also. There's a great transition going on here to restore a lot of our homes here, and that's good to see as well. So it's just not Mr. Norton; it's other people and some doctors. I've said earlier, they have bought several of the homes to have restored.
No, and it's beautiful because I see. So I drive every day by here. I go. My kids go to a school back here. It's a really nice school, but I drive around this. I go through Spring Street. Then I ended up in Carolina. Then I go into Lakeview. Is it?
Well, you go to Tower, and then you go to Quarry, and Quarry takes you to Lakeview.
Okay.
But to get there, also this street, I have failed to mention this a couple of weeks ago, Highland Street, Highland Avenue. It's where they all kind of connect to. Tower Street is where the water tower sit at one time. The Quarry Street eventually got out to the rock quarry, where Mr. Norton's had a lot of trouble getting the rocks where he's doing development out there. I don't know why Liberty is named that, but Terrace and Stone Street over there. Stone was named after one of the founders of the mill, an employee of the mill at one time, but Terrace had terraces at different times.
So now we're basically opening a different kind of worms here. So each street has its meaning then. So.
It does, but I want to make a suggestion.
Oh.
We've got 17 guys down there on that rock, plus 4 more. So there's 21 gentlemen. I wish these streets could be renamed for them, because we can find 21 places to put their names in this village. Victor was changed to Victory. I don't know how that happened or why that happened. It was always Victor Street, not named after me by any means. But Victor Montgomery, who's one of the founders, and actually one of the guys who procured the land here, where Packlet Milliken is. But to do something for those gentlemen. Now, I really don't know how to do that, but if someone is listening and knows that route to change name, because their names were down there, they gave their lives for this village. Not saying that there's other names that could possibly go on down there, like some of the great teachers, Mr. Dozier, Milliken, Montgomery, but those soldiers, they always have, they tug at my heart every day. And 2 of those guys were my friends in school. And it would be such a great honor to be able to name something after them in this village before it's too late.
That's amazing. That would be a good idea. I mean, it's so I have a friend that he lives in Dawsonville, and he's like, why don't you talk about the different names of streets? And that would be a good idea too.
Well, you could. You'd have to do some investigation.
Definitely.
Because when I do something, I say, well, this is what I believe. That doesn't mean it's true.
So how many stories are there about that?
This is what whether it's Myrtle Drive or East Main, because the main highway was West Main. And one thing that a lot of people have forgotten about were the bosses' houses that lined West Main going into Gainesville. Beautiful, beautiful homes. We're not talking about a mill home like these. They were just huge. And they were built for the bosses, the main bosses in the mill. And then they had the little smaller homes, but better than the tenant homes, were for the supervisors and overseers. They had it was definitely a difference in the style of homes for each level of authority in the mill. But those homes that went into Gainesville were tremendous. But when you start at East Main and you come down to Victor Street, Myrtle Drive, Highland, yes, they all have a story. I'm sure that somewhere someone had made a decision to name it this.
That would probably have to be through the county, I'm assuming, to make a
Well,
request.
yeah, probably.
Planning and zoning, maybe.
Planning and zoning, yes, I guess.
That might be it. I don't
Well,
know. I'll check on that.
I thought about this and I said, well, what if you get 2 or 3 guys that died in World War II, but they lived on the same street? Well, now, you're
That'll
going
be
to flip a coin. So that's not going to be a decision that I would make. I just think besides the memorial down there, the granite memorial and the rock that sit in front of the gym forever, there's to me, there should be probably some way to better honor them. Even Miss Paternity and Miss Frost and Miss Chapel wasn't here for just a couple of years, but other ladies, Miss Dozier, Miss Smallwood, who was a nurse. There's so many tremendous ladies. What Miss Strickland did for this church in this neighborhood right here, yeah, we might not have liked it as kids, but I see that we need, she was an overseer. She oversaw this, she had a good job in the mill. But maybe find some way, if they're going to make all these changes and redo this, maybe they need to rename some of these streets. I lived on Spring Street. I'm not attached to Spring Street. Carolina, I'm sure it had something to do with Spartanburg, Carolina, and South Carolina, because there were mills in South Carolina and North Carolina. Maybe there's some other meaning, but maybe it's time for that change also.
That'll be interesting. I'll check because I've never done that.
Well, that's the reason I'm saying this. I figure if anybody can get it moving, you possibly could.
Hey, you never know.
Buy a couple of homes and name it what you want. No, to honor them.
That would be really that would be really honored because it's the people that went to the first World War. It was World War One. Well, World War One.
Well, I'm sure there's a Spanish-American War, but we really didn't have we really didn't have a village at that time. So maybe if someone had died there, but it wasn't established then. But World War One, okay, and even during the Depression, I've got pictures of the Depression of the village that. If you saw what was going on in this village during the 1929 through 33, you wouldn't think there's any depression going on. And even though the mill had to pay their workers in they're called chits, just pieces of paper, instead of the money, because the war was going on. The depression was going on. They didn't have the money, but they would give them chits to go into the store to buy food, clothing, staples, whatever. And that was, part of the history of this village too. And there was a time when they paid all the employees silver dollars for whatever reason. That's in the Dutch Wells book too, for whatever reason. But when you get into that and you start, wow, man, what do you want to? How far do you want to go? How deep do you want to get in here? There's a lot of families that have a lot to do with this village. And as I sit here and think, okay, how would we go about naming some of these streets? Some of these areas, we can name a couple of streets now, a couple around the ball field here, down past the mill. At one time, there was no fence around the mill. You could walk down there, you could fish in the lake behind it. The old train depot sit behind New Holland Mill out toward Branch Street. The train would bring people up who were coming up to New Holland Springs to walk around court, around the lake, picnic tables, paddle boats. They even had baptisms at the far end of the lake toward Gainesville, but they also came up to enjoy New Holland Springs Resort. It was called Holland Resort of Holland Springs, which is now the Sunday school room at the Baptist Church. My mom and dad were married and spent their honeymoon at New Holland Springs. That was over there near where some of the dentist offices are now. They moved that in 1960-61 next to New Holland Baptist Church for Sunday school rooms. But at one time, people would come into New Holland for the warm springs, because there's 3 springs that were here that met, but also for the community and for social purposes.
I did not know that.
Wow.
So then I know there's I've seen the train over there. There's a little train.
There's several tracks over there for storage and all. Yeah. There's a lot of, there used to be 2 train tracks. Basically earlier, the one that went to Cornelia and on up in the Carolinas, but there's also another my grandson could tell me there was 2 types of tracks: standard gauge He would get on to me for not knowing this. But the smaller gauge railroad track was behind the mill also, and it went to Helen. Helen had its own lumber, and they had also discovered some gold there. And that train track went down. It crossed where Lanier, down here at the bottom of the hill, which goes kind of where limestone is, and that went to Helen. While the other main standard gauge and narrow gauge, the narrow gauge is where the smaller train went to Helen, and it would take money up to the lumber workers up there, even some visitors, and then it would return to Gainesville. But it was just from Gainesville that I know of to Helen and back.
So now that so I've driven around the area, obviously, because I work in this area and I live in this area, and sometimes I do get lost if I don't have my GPS. Okay, I do know where I stand at, but my thing is, what I've noticed is, so you have in this area here, it's like a little bit better, and then when you cross the train tracks, it's like really poor.
Which train tracks?
Oh gosh. Like over there.
Well, when you talking about where the main depot is in Gainesville?
I think so.
Well, that's the Gainesville Mill area. And we have mentioned that
yes,
there's not a lot of renovation or remodeling going on there. It is it's still. I'm sure there's some homes that are owned by the people who live there, but it's not being in any way remodeled or taken care of. It's neglect. It's being neglected.
Those houses are really, really small.
Oh, the same ones
the same ones as here too. So then there's so different levels of houses, duplexes, and all that. But then, so my thing is it because nobody has started investing in that area, right, or starting just picking it up and all that,
right?
Or interest or so forth.
I know that there's several people that own that mill there. That's no longer a mill. Haven't been a mill for years, but they haven't done anything to kind of
lift it up and bring it up.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that's going to happen next. Who knows? But hope so. But when you cross the railroad tracks going to that side of the city, it kind of
changes a little bit.
But before, this place was going through some of its own changes here before Bernal started coming out and Mr. Norton and Warner started doing what they do here.
Yeah, I'm still thinking. I still think that this area is going to become like a medical area.
I do too.
Because it's like everything that is growing and been adding. You see, there's dentists, there's chiropractors, there's a physical therapist here, but there's Northeast Georgia keeps on expanding. Same time, even by Lakeview, there's a general surgical center, and don't quote me on that. But then it keeps on adding more here because I think there's going to be a subdivision in this at the end of, just right behind here.
Right. We think that's coming.
Yeah.
And it's just going to continue to grow, and hopefully these homes will still be here quite a few years from now. But it depends on who comes in and takes an interest.
As long as they preserve the history, that's what matters. Because you look at a 100-year-old home, you look at this building, and it's the wood. They don't make it like back then at all. It could be over 100 years old, but it's amazing the quality. It's been through so much. But do you see anything cracking there? Of course not, because they don't build them like they used to. There's so much history, and I don't know. I'm just in love with it.
Well, they build it to last forever. But have you gone on a complete tour yourself?
This one?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, several times.
Okay, so you've seen the catacombs. Never mind.
Catacombs?
No, never mind. That's all.
No,
right.
you got to talk about.
That's okay.
Okay, so next episode, what we can do, since we're getting closer to October, we can actually do ghost stories of the building. This would be amazing.
Most of them are stories.
But that's interesting because people love that.
They do.
And it's going to be oh, wait, ghost stories in New Holland. And people, I would listen to that. And legends. Is there any legends here that you can?
What do you call a legend? What, give me.
Okay.
You're talking about an urban legend?
Or
something that may or may not have happened, but boy, it sure is fun to hear. Okay, those sometimes those are lies. And so people kind of, and they're fun to hear because they take them, stretch them, whatever. But what I say, is what I believe. Now I can't prove most of it, but I certainly can believe it. I know how it affected me in my childhood here, and how it affected some of my friends. Some of my friends I'm going to meet for lunch here in a few minutes are still affected by it. They're a lot of fun. But yes, there are. Yes.
All right. So get prepared for next episode on ghost stories, and was actually getting closer to Halloween. Yes, I know it's a month apart, but you know what? We like to start getting into the Halloween season. We're in pumpkin season and all that.
Well, they used to have Halloween carnivals in this gym.
Oh, they did.
And they had tunnels, and they had fully frightful figures and bullies from the neighborhood trying to take over and all to scare the younger kids. Teachers ran it. Teachers ran the Halloween carnival. It was great. It was wonderful. Great food, and cake walks, but also fish pond. You had fish, and they'd put something on the hook or whatever. But yeah, wonderful stories. There's even been a couple other people that have died. Mr. Williamson, I forget his name. It was a Williamson family. I don't think she'd mind me saying this. I went to school with Cleta Williamson. She married Milton Robson. Robson Corners owns. I mean, he's been just phenomenally successful in what he does. She and her older brother Johnny were born to a family. They were born later in life, but their family lived somewhere in the village. I'm not sure where they lived before they moved to Oconee Circle. And their family, before she was born, and before Johnny, I think, was born also. Johnny might have been small. I think, anyway, that family lost 3 sons in just a really short time. One went over by the trolley at the bottom of the hill here. One had died in the pool, drowned, and the other one was killed in World War II. And we're talking in a very short period of time. And that family was known to be just a, rock solid and whatever. And then Cleta and Johnny came on later, and just wonderful people. And just kind of wish they were here to tell some of their stories. But it is paid. That's not urban legend. That is the truth. We'll talk about the urban legends later. But there's some good ones here.
All right. So next episode, stay tuned. We're going to be talking about urban legends and ghost stories.
Would that make anyone want to move here?
No.
Well, if Stephen King moved in the neighborhood, yes, they would move here.
But you know what? It's about knowing you got ghost stories.
But also, I mentioned Stephen King. Time out.
All right, go for it.
Time out. There's a gentleman here. His name is Brad Strickland. We had 2 Brad Stricklands. I really wasn't familiar with the younger Brad Strickland, but the older Brad Strickland is still an author, worked at Burnell, taught everywhere. Wonderful person, has written some fabulous books. And one of him was called Shadow Show. And it's about Gainesville and New Holland. And I'm getting chills thinking about it because I love that book. But he wrote about New Holland in a way that it was a story. It was a novel. And he, to me, he deserves some sort of attention because he's just a spectacular person and fun to get to know. And to hear him talk, to hear him share a story is really remarkable.
Is he still alive?
Yeah, he's still alive. He lives in Snellville.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
We could probably bring him in.
He would probably come out here, yeah. You got to know that there's a lot of interesting people that grew up here, smart people, great athletes. Not athletes. Okay, you know the difference?
No.
Well, never mind. Athletes, professional people. It's the CEO of Coca-Cola, okay, Mr. Ivester. What's bigger than that? Brad Strickland was an author, a national author. I mean, this guy was big time, and he was an actor, and he taught school, and he was just. But there's been others. To me, some of these legends, not just urban legend, are those folks that spent 50 and 60 years in that mill down there. To me, those are as big a heroes as anyone else because I've been down there. I know what it did to my dad. I know how it was to work in there, and they loved it. And they did it to put food on the table, to pay for or to give them the best education. And most of them I really didn't know anyone at that time that didn't go to church. By the way, I'm going to continue to wear this hat because if you don't believe, just come and see. Yes, I know it's from Chosen, the TV show on YouTube, but come and see. Catherine Dozier wrote about that. Her entry says, well, if you don't believe it, this was written, probably she wrote this introductory. It says right here on this page at the bottom, if you don't believe her, come and see. This was long before the Chosen came up with this saying.
She started it.
But there's another saying that we're going to adopt. If you don't really believe it, come out here and taste and see. You can taste it. There's something about New Holland. You just, not just restaurants, just absorb it. Like Warner thinks this building talks to him. Well, somebody's talking to Warner. I don't know. But honestly, I know what he's talking about. It breathes.
It basically, what it does is actually it attracts you. Like so my friend Jessie, so a little bit back, Jessie is, she started as my working out buddy at 4:30 in the morning. Believe me, who wants to wake up at 4:30 in the morning? But she was an inspiration, and I got my butt up and I worked out every day with her, 4:30 in the morning. And we've developed a really good friendship back and forth. And, that's when she actually introduced me to New Holland Parlor, to New Holland, to the building. And basically, I think you can find me here more than you can actually find me in my house. And I say it jokingly. I'm like, honestly, I mean, I could probably open an office here, but it's just like, I don't know. It's probably the energy of this building, like, draws you to the building because there's so much history. And it's not only that, but it's just like, it's amazing. I mean, I love it.
Now, you just answered the question. You just answered what you've been searching for. I bet you could open an office here.
I probably could.
So, depends on how much you're interested in it, because this will be a fabulous place. Fabulous place. I bet Mr. Brock will entertain that.
He definitely will. I've thought about it. But no, I mean, and it's just for me, and I don't know if I told you, I don't know who I was talking to. Probably I was talking to Jessie, but I spent a lot of time in this particular area. The zip code is 30501.
I think so.
Yeah. And honestly, I like it just because I live in Mundy Mill. That's Oakwood, exit 16. But I spend most of my time here because of my kids. My kids go to Lakeview Academy, and it's just surrounding me. And I do business, in most likely in this area by the lake or different areas. But it's just like, for me, it's just easier. And the highway is just right there. Exit 24, you get out of exit 24, you got Kroger there. You got so many things. And even, you know what, if I need to go to the hospital's like not even 10 minutes away. And if I want food, he's going to Double D's in a little bit. So, hey, it's right there. So it's just like, it's a well-built community. So stay tuned for next time.
Next time.
All right. Keep in mind, ghost stories. Have a nice day.